During the era of the American West, myths were created from grit and smoke. Criminals and sheriffs trod the very same streets. Bars were filled with both melody and unease, while the vast wilderness extended into dangerous, uncharted territory. It was a place where expert marksmen built their reputations, settlements emerged from emptiness, and the distinction between right and wrong faded in the evening light. At Academy of Shorts, we resurrect these figures from the frontier, employing artificial intelligence to give movement to historical images, allowing you to encounter the pioneers, the notorious bandits, and the cowboys as though they've time-traveled to the present. Annie Oakley, originally named Phoebe Ann Moses in 1860, was more than a crack shot. She was a contemporary myth. Though just 5 feet in height, she could slice a playing card from its side at a significant distance, a feat that amazed spectators throughout America and Europe. As a performer in Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, Annie transformed shooting into a spectacle, winning over audiences with her personality and her precision. She challenged the norms of her time, a female pioneer in a male-dominated arena who grew into one of the frontier's most timeless symbols. She managed to clear her family's debt by the age of 15, selling the game she hunted to nearby inns and eateries. Black Bart, known originally as Charles E. Bowles, was an unconventional criminal. This courteous desperado of the frontier gained notoriety for holding up stagecoaches while never discharging his weapon. Invariably civil and frequently depositing poetic verses, signed Black Bart the Poet, he confused authorities and became a figure of public fascination. However, beneath the formal hat and intense gaze was a person molded by conflict, hardship, and a life in hiding. A notable detail about Black Bart is that he was approaching his 5th decade when he started his life of crime. Following his time in jail, he disappeared completely, his ultimate destiny remaining an enigma of the frontier. Butch Cassidy, originally named Robert Leroy Parker in 1866, was not always a seasoned criminal. Brought up in a Mormon agricultural household in Utah, he could ride and handle livestock long before adulthood. In his 20s, he swapped ranch work for revolvers, establishing the Wild Bunch Gang. They evolved into the most prosperous robbers of railroads and banks in the Western Territories, consistently evading capture. Butch possessed charisma, cleverness, and a famous knowing grin, the sort of individual who could steal from you and leave you feeling as if you'd gained a companion. His final days are shrouded in uncertainty, with some stories saying he died in Bolivia, while many believe he retired peacefully under an assumed identity. She was known as Calamity Jane, a title as untamed as the lands she wandered. Her birth name was Martha Jane Cannery, and she professed to have worked as a scout for the U.S. military, accompanied Wild Bill Hickok, and confronted criminals and peril with a brave spirit. Yet Jane was not merely a legendary sharpshooter. She cared for the ill in epidemics, wore frontier attire, consumed whiskey freely, and told stories that mixed fact and fiction. Was she the courageous scout she claimed, or simply an architect of her own fame? The record is unclear, but her reputation endures in the lore of the Wild West. They knew him as Wild Bill, a peace officer, a card player, and a shootist whose reputation alone gave criminals pause. Coming into the world as James Butler Hickok in 1837, he built his mythos on the American frontier. Serving as a Northern scout in the Civil War, a federal marshal, and a man lethal with a pistol, Wild Bill's mind was as sharp as his trigger finger. He maintained order on the violent roads of Abilene, Kansas, confronted bandits in gritty bars, and lived by a steadfast personal code. However, destiny found him in Deadwood, in the Dakota Territory, where a gunshot concluded his life, and his final poker cards, a pair of aces and eights, were eternally christened the Dead Man's Hand. Roaming the farthest reaches of the territory was a man called Pawnee Bill, a personality bigger than reality, shaped by the grit and peril of the classic West. Christened Gordon William Lilly, he gained his moniker while working alongside the Pawnee people, learning their language and winning their respect. Yet his fame was cemented in the performance arena, with gunfire echoing and hooves drumming. He made the Wild West a vivid spectacle for countless spectators in numerous towns. He was more than a cattleman. He was a weaver of tales, an entrepreneur, and a link between cultures. Pawnee Bill understood that the era of the frontier was ending, yet he guaranteed its essence would live on. Sam Bass galloped directly into folklore, possessing a grin as swift as his shooting hand. He may not have been the most rapid gunfighter, but he had a risk-taker's charisma and steady courage. Famous for executing the largest train heist on the Union Pacific Line, Bass turned into a folk figure for many and a persistent problem for authorities. His existence was a brief, bright flash of bold robberies, long journeys, and close calls, which ended when his luck ran out in Round Rock, Texas. Sam Bass, the grinning outlaw who lived recklessly and was killed in a gunfight. And while the authorities took his life, the story of Sam Bass became the property of the public and of his sister, who would not allow his memory to fade. In the lawless West, where criminals reigned and order was rare, one figure loomed larger than myth: Bass Reeves. Having begun his life in bondage, Reeves fled and emerged as one of the initial African-American deputy marshals serving west of the Great River. He patrolled the territory with fearless determination, credited with capturing more than 3,000 felons, frequently operating alone in dangerous lands. His ability with a firearm was legendary, his commitment to fairness absolute. A few speculate his adventures formed the basis for the Lone Ranger story. Bass Reeves was not merely an officer, he was an enigma, a pillar of law in a land of anarchy, and his legacy continues to ride through time. She was known as the Bandit Queen. Belle Starr, originally named Myra Mabel Shirley, was raised in the turmoil of the Civil War, a time that created criminals and gave rise to myths. Carrying a revolver and a fearsome notoriety that preceded her, Belle was both dreaded and respected. She associated with Jesse James, the Younger family, and was consistently near the violence of criminal life. Charged with stealing horses, consorting with outlaws, and sheltering criminals, she navigated an existence poised between charisma and peril. Yet her tale concluded in enigma, murdered by an unseen assailant on a remote path, her killer never identified. Belle Starr was more than a simple criminal. She was an icon of defiance, a female who etched her identity into the untamed soul of the frontier. Even after her death, Belle Starr persists as a mystery, a woman who challenged her era and inscribed her name into the wild core of the American West. Wyatt Earp entered the world in 1848 in Monmouth, Illinois. He would grow into one of the most renowned and contentious personalities of the Wild West. Earp filled numerous roles: peace officer, card sharp, bar owner, and shootist. He worked in the most violent cattle towns from Dodge City to Tombstone. In 1881, together with his brothers and Doc Holliday, Earp was involved in the OK Corral shootout, a 30-second conflict that cemented his myth. To some, he was a courageous protector of justice. Others labeled him a merciless schemer who obscured the boundary between lawful conduct and crime. Following Tombstone, he pursued his brother's murderers in a violent quest for revenge. He then moved through various endeavors in mining, gambling, and commerce throughout the territory. His birth name was William Frederick Cody, but the Globe recognized him as Buffalo Bill, a guide, a fighter, and an entertainer. His existence merged the distinction between fact and folklore. On the plains, he acquired his moniker by slaughtering bison to nourish railway workers. In conflict, he served with the Army against the most formidable plains fighters. Yet it was in performance that he achieved eternity. His Wild West spectacle transported the essence of the frontier overseas, amazing royalty with charging stallions, expert marksmen, and vibrant tales of the savage West. Was he a champion or a virtuoso of crafting legends? Maybe he was both. In Buffalo Bill, the individual and the fable merged, and America's iconic Wild West was created. She was called Olive Oatman, a settler child whose visage became an emblem of the frontier's most grim narratives. In 1851, her relatives were ambushed on the isolated Arizona Trail. She was merely 14 when she was captured, initially by the Yavapai and later exchanged to the Mojave. Seasons turned. She dwelled with them, labored, and received the permanent sign of their tribe, a chin tattoo inscribed in blue. When she was ultimately brought back to American society, she was not the same child who had departed. A few considered her saved. Many murmured she was tormented, torn between two cultures. Was she a victim who endured, or perpetually an outsider to each? The tale of Olive Oatman is more than a past event. It is an enigma permanently inscribed upon the flesh of the frontier. He was named Henry McCarty, but history knows him as Billy the Kid. Emerging from anonymity, he secured his legacy with a revolver in his grip and officers on his trail. Many claimed he shot 21 men, a life taken for each year of his brief existence. Plenty suggested the real number was much smaller. But myths are constructed from rumor. Billy was not a common criminal. Skilled with a firearm and even more adept with charm, he was both a bandit and a people's champion. A youth who transformed into a specter before he could reach adulthood. Even today, in the sands of the Old West, his identity remains. Billy the Kid, the youth who could not be captured and would always be remembered. Some knew him as a card player, others a murderer. But in the annals of the past, he is Doc Holliday, a man as shrewd as his deck and doubly lethal with a gun. Born John Henry Holliday, a genteel Southerner who became a shootist. His notoriety traveled on gossip, through hazy bars and along the dirt roads of the territory, a comrade to Wyatt Earp, an adversary to innumerable men who did not survive the encounter. Doc trod the narrow boundary separating existence from the grave, a sickness in his lungs and a revolver on his waist, composed gaze, unwavering grip, and a standing tempered in violence and bullets. This is more than a simple picture. This is the countenance of the West's most perilous ally and its most lethal foe. He possessed neither riches nor a formal rank, yet his name reverberates through the ages. Sitting Bull, a chief of the Lakota, a fighter, a holy man. His power existed not merely in combat, but in his soul, resolute, inscrutable, undefeated. He bore the burden of his nation with the quiet of rock and the insight of the land. His gaze had witnessed struggle. His words held conviction, and his mere being demanded reverence. To his adversaries he was resistance. For his nation he was promise. And within our records he persists as a mystery. A leader who opposed the flood of an empire and declared to the ages, "We will survive." Sitting Bull, the fighter who never yielded and never shall. In the dusk of the American West, an identity was spoken with both dread and intrigue. Jesse James, criminal, myth, phantom of the frontier. Many named him a champion for the common man. Plenty, a ruthless robber. Yet everyone conceded he was beyond capture. He galloped through time with resolve in his stare and passion in his soul, a pistol on his hip and a bounty for his life. Treachery, violence, and loyalty defined his journey. And even after his killing, his tale would not fade. Was Jesse James a figure of revenge, a protester fighting an inevitable change, or a fable molded by the terror of his enemies? This much is sure. The myth endures, and Jesse James is still waiting. The Old West may have vanished, yet its myths persist. The shooting ceased. The settlements became still. And numerous of these bandits, marshals, and settlers faded into the past, but their tales of bravery, ambition, treachery, and perseverance continue to resonate through the American West.